All right, everybody. Here it is. Long overdue and without much ado about everything. Here by popular demand. I mean, I've been getting letters from everyone about this. They're like, you gotta do it. Even strangers who don't know me and have no idea what I'm talking about somehow felt compelled to send me those kinds of letters. It's the classic novel tier list. And yes, that is me sharding. I am on the toilet. There, you happy? You went snooping around where your nose didn't belong, and now your nose is somewhere where it really doesn't want to be. Now let's get a few prelims out of the way so that we know what we're in for. First, I want to define the term novel. This is just my own personal definition. I don't know what the dictionary definition is, but this is the one we're going to apply to this classic novel tier list. All right. For the sake of this exercise, we're going to define novel as any narrative plot in prose form. Okay, so basically, it's going to include the autobiography, but what it doesn't include is plays, okay, because those are not written typically in prose form, and they're also not really narrated. They're essentially just scripts of dialogue with minor narrations here and there, typically. Okay, so no, Streetcar, no Macbeth, no Death of a Salesman, none of that kind of stuff. And because it requires a plot, like a sequential narrative plot, this also not going to include treatises. Okay, so no Leviathan, no The Wealth of Nations, no friggin', I don't know, Dialogue aux Enfers entre Machiavel et Montesquieu. So none of that. Oh, here comes another one. Now, of course, the main purpose of doing this is, number one, show you how many books I read. But number two, if you ever find yourself curious about one of these titles and wondering whether it would suit your reading fancy, you'll have this video as a reference. And let's be honest, no one's ever going to read any of these books again because that period of time is over. Literally, I don't think anyone in human history will ever read any of these books again because people just don't do that anymore. The other thing I want to mention is about the tier list itself, because we're using the standard, for reasons I don't really understand, S, A, B, C, D system. I never understood why S is a thing, like what it stands for or why that's considered the top thing. The pretty standard grading metric that everyone is familiar with begins with A at the top, B, C, etc. And if I was doing a closed circuit tier list, meaning like if I were to rank something, if I were to rank all of the individual items within a topic, then that's what I would do. Meaning, like if these were the only books that ever existed, then I would just do A, B, C, because S just doesn't make sense to me. But actually, because these are considered the classics, the best novels ever produced, which in some cases that might not actually even be true, but at least not by my standards. But they did become, for whatever reason, classics, either rightfully or wrongfully. But they are probably on average a lot better than the average novel that just some random schmuck produced. So we'll skew the list upward and include an S tier for the very best of the best ever written. But normally I don't really like to do that. Quick overdub here to try to put that more succinctly. Basically, it would be weird to put a classic novel in the C tier because then people might have the misapprehension that it's in C tier according to all novels. But these are just being ranked against each other, not in the entire history of novels collectively, if that makes sense. And it doesn't. Deal with it. All right, I'm going to be honest here too. I'm trying to make this spectacular and entertaining, but I'm really not feeling that great right now. But I got to get this done, so I'm going to go through it faster than I wanted to, and may have to re-record it, but I need to get something done with this, so at least get a draft in place. Okay, 100 Years of Solitude. Definitely very interesting. It's very unique. Oh, well, I'll start with, let's first of all, nice little look at the novel. I think the cover, which I think certainly captures the spirit of the novel well. It's the writing, the imagery, it's all very ornate, very exotic. And I'm going to put it in the A tier. I will say it drags a little bit in the middle. And also it's tough if you're not familiar with like Spanish diminutives, because the people have like, there's successive. Also, another prelim I wanted to get out of the way is that I'm going to try to avoid giving away too much about the plot, just so that people come in pretty fresh. But obviously, I'll reference some basic details that don't really give anything away. But anyway, the novel covers successive generations, and it includes a lot of like men who have variations of the same name, and it gets a little bit confusing. Actually, it's one guy will have the the regular name, and then some guy will have that version, but with like Lito at the end, and then this is a really weird explanation. But anyway, you just have to take my word for it if you haven't read it, that it is a very unique, fascinating setting, but it starts to drag a little bit with generals. I think it's something that starts with an M, I think, but anyway, so it's a good read. It gets a little bit slow in the middle, and it's also a little bit confusing, but the good parts are really good. So I'm going to put it solidly in the A tier. 1984, obvious S tier. This is probably the most cited, my favorite novel, like, the most commonly cited book as someone's favorite novel, even though I feel like most people who say that don't really like understand most of the point of it. Yes, it is about like surveillance, but it's also about the natural tendency toward hierarchy and what that hierarchy looks like, and sort of its inevitability into the future and that kind of thing. But it's a great story. The plot itself in Orwell's writing, of course, is famously lucid and clear and crisp, without being overly loquacious. He's a very like straightforward writer, but there's a real beauty in the simplicity of his style. And so everything about the novel is just great. I mean, it's basically flawless. It's not too short, not too long. It's got a compelling story. It's got compelling philosophical themes, interesting characters. And so that's clearly where that belongs, no question about it. And Then There Were None, yay! I read this book the first time I read it was in 8th grade, I believe. And I remember really enjoying it then. And first of all, let me place it. I'm going to put it in the A tier. It's not like classic in sort of the sense of some of these. It's kind of like a typical whodunit overdub here. It's not like a literary philosophical classic. It's not like a profound milestone in literary history, but it is a classic in the sense of mainstream like culture and entertainment. So yeah, partly because of how popular it became, it inspired many more. So I was originally thinking I was going to put it in the B, even though it's a personal favorite of mine. But actually, it's really a fun read. So I'm gonna keep it in the A tier. Animal Farm, that's also going to go in the A tier. Definitely a classic. Interesting story. Again, Orwell, his writing is just perfect in the sense that it's not too much of anything, but it's not too little of anything. It's really in that Goldilocks zone. The plot is very interesting in terms of like there is suspense that's created over time. It is a group of animals. Like maybe the plot is not as compelling as some of the titles that involve human drama and conflict. The fact that they're animals might make it seem a little bit almost like like a child's version of 1984, but that's really not the case. Fuck, I got like weird stuff happening on my insides. But anyway, it's a good read. I would expand on this more, but there's so much still to go that I'm... okay, this is the Daily Double. This is not really a novel. I mean, I don't know. It's sort of written in dialogue form. I don't know what you would call this. I mean, I guess it could be produced as a play. Maybe it is technically a play. I want to put it in the A tier. It's largely just like a long monologue, pretty much. I mean, that's really like all of it. But this is also personally meaningful to me, because I've always had a fascination with Socrates since I was in I think it was the 6th grade. And we first learned about him when we were studying, we studied the progression of civilizations in social studies, Sumeria and Egypt and Greece, and also like the Indus Valley civilization and early China. And when we did ancient Greece, we learned about Socrates, a little bit. I mean, it was just like a cursory look at it. It wasn't in-depth like scholarship, because again, this was 6th grade. But I remember, we did learn about like the figure of him and what he was about. And I just thought it was like the coolest like person. I was like, wow, this guy goes around like philosophizing, asking questions. Seemed like a badass to me. So I always had an affinity for him. And then this really, I found so much profundity when I read this as an adult. And thought it was really interesting. And I actually performed I'll have to edit in the video clip. Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, that's S tier. This is like the great autobiography. It might not have been the very first, but absolutely one of the first, and also probably the most influential. My mouth is getting dry. The most influential publications of this genre, of the autobiography genre, and it's adventurous, inspiring, thought-provoking, and such an incredible life he led. And I remember reading this. The first time I read this, I was living in my car around the area of the Will and Ariel Durant Branch Library of Los Angeles, in like the Brentwood area. I was mainly like parking my car outside the library and sleeping at night. And inside they had this book on like the free giveaway bookshelf, Anthology of American Literature, Volume 1, which was really cool. It had like, it basically truly like the beginning of American literature, in terms of like starting with Columbus's earliest letters from the New World back to Spain, and then up through like literature from like early Puritan settlers, Cotton Mather, and guys like that, and then into colonial times, and of course it had the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which is not very long. I mean, it fit into like an anthology, that itself was kind of big for a book, but not huge. So it's not a long read, but it's really good. And it's interesting to see how also, they published it verbatim from the original manuscript, that he wrote it in, 18 whatever 100. Maybe it was even the late 17. Well, I guess it would have had to have been because he was old by the time of the Declaration of Independence when he signed it, I think. Because he wrote the book at his old age. He actually wrote a second version in his even older age. Like, he wrote this version when he was like 70 something, early 70s. And then 10 years later, by popular request, he wrote kind of like a follow-up, because he didn't cover his later life. He covered his early life, which is really like filled with adventure and exploration and invention and stuff like that. This is a very long description. I mean, there's so much I could say about this. Shout out to Charlie Munger, too, because, he's, of course, the late, great Charlie Munger, of course, well known for his affinity for this novel and his admiration for Franklin generally, as I am. In my circles, I'm well regarded for my those same affinities that Charlie has. But anyway, I'll get off this because I could actually go on a lot longer, but... Brave New World is definitely going to go in the A tier, mainly for its prescience. The plot itself is actually not that, to me. I didn't think it was that interesting. I didn't think the writing was that compelling. He also used the word indefatigable like a noticeable number of times. He didn't really go hard in terms of finding synonyms for some of his most common descriptions. He kept referring to many, many things as indefatigable, indefatigable, or however you'd like to pronounce it. But I just remember that word, he kept using that word instead of, finding a variety of synonyms. Anyway, so obviously I think the whole pretext for the novel was, is really more of a post-text, because I think the whole thing he wanted to do was really publish the opening with regards to the sort of the genetic process of development, which is really, when you think about the fact that this book was written in the 1930s, it's actually remarkable how clairvoyant he was. I didn't realize that genetics went back that far. Although I guess, the Nazis were doing genetic experimentation in the late 30s or whatever it was. But I always thought, for a long time when I heard about genetics, that it was a very recent science, which obviously many of the developments and implications of it that we understand now did come more recently. But when I after having read this book, when I later found out that it was written actually before 1984, I was really quite startled, because for such an early stage, he was very, very, as I said, prescient. He was indefatigably prescient about the ultimate, seeing the long-term consequences of genetic engineering. Really just because that's, we appear to be heading exactly where this book predicted we would go, almost 100 years ago, which I just think is really remarkable, because I still picture that time period as being horse and buggies, and I guess they were starting to roll out the Model Ts or whatever, or maybe they already had for a decade, but I still picture the 1930s. I think it was late 30s that he wrote it, so almost 1940. Even that I still picture as being super primitive, and it's amazing that he was talking about, because I don't think they were doing anything advanced in practice with genetics, but he really had quite a vision. But anyway, so the beginning of the book, the sort of introductory. I'm not finding myself very eloquent. Stuff is gas is pushing on my organs. So please forgive me. I might even have to pause this. But anyway, after he establishes sort of the factory process of sort of reproductive hierarchy, establishment, whatever you want to call it, the book's not even that interesting. It's arguably not even that dystopian. I think it sort of gets categorized as a dystopian novel, I think it's more dystopian. I don't think he's like necessarily glorifying nor condemning this type of future. He's just showing it. So it's kind of topian like that. And but the plot I didn't think was like super like compelling. But nonetheless, it is a classic, and it definitely should be read. At least, I think the first, like I said, chapter is pretty eye opening. So I'll put it in the A tier. Candide by Voltaire, classic. I'm also going to put that in the A tier. I mean, A tier is obviously it's in the middle. It's kind of the average, so there's probably going to be a lot of A tier. Shit. This is a good, sprightly, whimsical novel. It is funny. Humor, the thing about Candide is that it is, like, I was impressed with the way it made me laugh. It's not, like, roll around funny, but it is cheeky and humorous. And it's pretty, like, sprightly paced. I remember I read this when I was living in Hollywood, trying to become a famous actor, and it was pretty. I mean, I found myself like like reading it pretty quickly and not putting it down because it was an engaging novel, and it's basically a satire. It's a comedy. It's a parody. It's sort of like a mock Odyssey, and. So, but what I was going to say about humor is that humor doesn't necessarily translate across generations the way drama and suspense do, because I think, things like murder and deceit and betrayal and things like that are more intrinsic to our nature. They're less culturally dependent in terms of recognizing. Humor, I think, is much more context driven, time and place. Things that would be funny to us now, if you don't have like kind of all the background of like where we come from and what our lives are like and stuff like that, you just might not understand. In fact, a lot of like Shakespeare comedies are like that, to me anyway, that like they're comedies, but they're really not that funny to me, because like a lot of the things that are jokes that people back then would have recognized as a joke and understood and laughed at, like you can't even tell it's a joke now because like the context of our lives is just so much different. So anyway, Candide, it's a fun read. It's not like, there are actually philosophical themes. I mean, of course, he wrote it as a response to Leibniz's like the concept that he pushed about the best of all possible worlds, etc., etc. And it sort of explores that, but it's not really like, it doesn't really dwell on like deeply on the philosophical themes. It just sort of like incorporates them casually over the course of a whimsical story. But I liked it, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. Here we go. This is a pretty damn cool cover. Catcher in the Rye. I guess that would be our protagonist, Holden, or just some random flit. Just kidding. But I thought that his use of that word was funny, flit. This also is going to go in the A tier. It's a good read. It's sort of like, it's actually sort of like Candide in its pacing and in its humor and kind of in the almost like dismissive tone of the narration. Like it doesn't take itself really seriously. It just, oh yeah, this is what happened, and then that's happened, and then it's not, it doesn't set out to be like a grave account of something. It's very kind of casual and informal, but tells an interesting story. This one I also read while I was living in my car outside of the Will and Ariel Durant Branch Library, either before or after I read the Ben Franklin autobiography. I don't remember which I read first, but this, I was reading this every night in my car before I clicked off the overhead light and went to sleep. And I did enjoy it. I remember enjoying this. Okie doke. Clockwork Orange. Great cover. How about that? And that's going to be like the best part of it. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Actually, I'll be honest. I did read this novel, but I don't remember it all that well. I remember when I read it. Of course, like, oh shit. There's the major hype around this novel comes from the movie that was obviously made later. They were both made before I was born. Or maybe A Clockwork Orange, the movie, was made sometime shortly after I was born. I don't know. Sometime in the 80s, I guess. What is my point about this, though? So, yeah. I don't remember the book all that well. But I remember, it was very, well regarded. I think mostly because of the movie, which I haven't seen. I still haven't seen the movie. But I remember when I was reading it thinking, it's okay. Like, kind of just like going through it, but nothing really like, I guess it didn't stick with me all that much. I know it was like innovative in some ways for like kind of like creating its own linguistics. Obviously, it's mostly written in standard English, but he creates sort of a slang vernacular that is just made up in the book, and so that's kind of cool. But I remember like kind of just like continuing on through it, and I didn't find it like all that dramatic. I mean, obviously there's descriptions that are pretty like intense, and I don't know though. It was just kind of whatever for me. Okay, Crime and Punishment. Classic Dostoevsky. I hear someone knocking on something outside, but it's not my door. Nikolai Nikolaevich, and who I forget what the maid lad's name was. I think it was like Alexander. Well, the names don't matter, but this. So I remember this one when I read. For some reason, I had two copies of it. Like I had come across two different translations of it, and at first I thought like the writing was like, in both of them was kind of clumsy, which was curious. I was like, at first I didn't even like when I first picked up the book. I figured it was probably written in Russian and translated in English, but it didn't actually say on the book that it was translated. I had to look that up online. That like two different copies I had that like had, or well, maybe it must have, because I mean they had two different authors, but it didn't like. Well, what did it say? I don't know, but I remember when I first picked up this book. I remember for some reason I had like two different copies of this book simultaneously, like they were like two different translations, and I remember at first thinking like the writing in both wasn't very good. Like it felt very clumsy, and I didn't know if like it made me wonder. If he had written this in English, like as a Russian, but it said on the book like translated by so and so, and I was just surprised because maybe it wasn't a native. Maybe it was like both translators were native Russian speakers, not native English speakers, because obviously whoever translated had to know both. But I don't know. The novel started kind of slow, and it was like for whatever reason, both translations I had like were written kind of like weird. And so I didn't really like it at first, but I stuck with it, and it did become quite interesting. And it's actually a sort of a seminal work of what is known as sort of the transcendental school of philosophy, basically, which I won't get into too much here, but Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, stuff about this, and of course Thomas Robert or Robert Thomas, I always forget the order, Carlyle, who wrote like the Great Man Theory, and this was like in the late 1800s. This was a sort of common theme to write about, although, this book is unique in terms of the way that it contextualizes transcendentalism into its particular plot. So basically, but it is flawed because there were censors at the time. He didn't really explore the theme, I think, the way it plays out in real life, because you can't really say such things publicly. It was basically produced as a serial publication. Back in the day, of course, novels would often be printed in magazine sort of segments, serial publications, piece by piece, coming out as periodicals rather than publish the whole thing all at once. It was written for kind of like a serialized audience of readers, and it also, of course, in the Russian Empire, was subject to the censors, and of course, in both in Tsarist Russia and in Soviet Russia, and pretty much all throughout Russian history, censorship has been pretty oppressive. So the bones of a really deep philosophical novel are there, and he does touch on some very profound points. And like I said, it does get very interesting as you go into it. But then as it resolves, it does feel like it leaves a bit on the table, just because, sort of by necessity. He couldn't really write it the way it should truly be written. But it did become an interesting read nonetheless. I enjoyed it. Put it in the A tier. Okay. Here we go. I was thinking this was going to be Moby Dick, but actually, Moby Dick is next. This is, of course, the sperm whale and the petunias from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is, it's not necessarily a classic in the way some of these others are, but it's a classic to me and many. So I think it's worthy of inclusion on this list. And I did, of course, for the first time read this as a youngin'. This was one of the first kind of adult novels that I read as a young lad, and was just absolutely thrilled and charmed by it. Is this for me? No, it's someone's. There's persistent knocking outside, but it's not on my door, I guess. It's funny because I don't know as an adult, well, I did actually read it again as a young adult, in my early 20s, and did enjoy it now that I'm, even further decades on, because it inspired so much, like I said, the whole thing about humor is that it tends to, erode the impact of humor. Of a given, piece of humor tends to erode over time. So if I've read this for the first time today, I don't know if I would find it as funny. But I remember, I absolutely adored this novel, as again so many have. And I'll again, I'll put it in the A tier, because I don't know. In a lot of ways, for what it is, it's sort of a flawless. It's so cheeky and compelling and engaging, and I I mean, it is such a classic for like the like the humor sci-fi genre, which I don't even know how big the humor sci-fi genre is. There's a lot of humor, there's a lot of sci-fi. I don't know. I mean, it's such an original, as far as I'm aware, and I feel like this goes in the S tier. Come on now, it's got to be. And I like trying to decide if I really even need to say more, because this probably, of all of these, this might be, well, and 1984, but most people probably only read this in school and really didn't, the average person just doesn't like really digest stuff like this. This is probably the most commonly like read in terms of, the audience will have read this as a leisure thing. Not the average person. The average person doesn't have any idea what this is about, but I mean, like, anyone who's watching this video, like, they might not have read, 100 Years of Solitude, or maybe they didn't read Roots or Crime and Punishment, whatever. But probably a lot of people will have read this. And I think those people would agree with me that it belongs in the S tier. But I probably don't need to say too much about it because, like I said, it's probably maybe the most familiar title on here. In terms of, like, people actually having read it. This might be the most familiar novel on here in terms of people having not read it, but knowing what it is and what it's about. I gotta make sure I'm still recording, because imagine if I did all this shit and it wasn't recording. Okay, it appears to be, yeah, still, okay. So I'll put this, actually, we need to put some more stuff in B tier. The beginning of this novel is quite, like, energizing. I remember I was not in transients when I wrote this. I was living in an apartment, and I remember curling up with it at the beginning. When he's preparing for his adventure, I was stoked along with him. I was engrossed in every page and like really excited for what the novel promised to be based on the beginning. But then it really slows down, and in some places it really slows down to the point where you have to skip ahead of these like 18-page long, like taxonomical classifications of whales. I mean, he goes on for a long time about like the bone structure of a particular species of whale, and it's really quite absurd. And like you just can't torture yourself like reading through that whole thing. It's just not worth it. But and then of course, so for anyone who's obviously read this, they understand, and probably some degree of people who like have never read it still know that the company Starbucks is named after a character in this novel, Starbuck. But it does get pretty slow, and as the novel gets going, I don't know. I would say it's not super interesting. It's more promising than actually interesting. It starts off really exciting, I think, and I was really ready for a magnificent journey, but it just got really slow. He also really, I think, he's a little bit grandiloquent. He types excessively in kind of like a Jacobean Shakespearean verse, where he proclaimeth with great flourish but I mean, it kind of like, there's long paragraphs, in some cases even that span multiple pages, where he's really writing in these kind of like laborious, sort of, like I said, Jacobean, or I don't know if it's like Elizabethan, or how much difference there is between them. Whatever the Shakespearean era, where they write with about bequeathing upon your person, thou, how art thou, whatever it is. Even though I think by the time he was writing this novel, they weren't talking that way anymore. But like, excuse me, it was clear he was like a very committed student of Shakespeare, and he really incorporated a lot of that, which can be, I mean, like fun, like in doses, but I think he really kind of went overboard with it, and so, and apparently when this novel first came out, it was well received in England, maybe because of that. It didn't really get much traction in the U.S., as I recall reading, unless I'm reversing these two, but I think this is the way it was, because Herman Melville was an American, and his book didn't do all that well in America, but it was like very popular in England. So I guess maybe he just knew his target audience. But like I said, I think even in England they didn't talk that way anymore by the time the book was written. But anyway, I would say, pick it up if and join Ishmael, for his adventure and get stoked, and then take it with him. And if you might enjoy the kind of the unfoldings of whale species analysis more than I did, and of course there is classic characters like Captain Ahab, who's definitely, he was, that was an interesting character and fun to read his story. But like I said, it just kind of dragged, and I like the climax isn't as exciting as, in my opinion, as it, might be made out to be, or that it kind of gets dramatized in lore about the novel, or in video representations that have been done and stuff like that. I don't know. It could be A tier because it's such a classic work in terms of notoriety and stuff like that. But my personal it's a B tier for me. Okay, picture of Dorian Gray. I'll put it in the A tier. Conceptually, this novel is very original. I really liked the concept. As I just said, hate to be tautological and indefatigable, but I did I really thought the plot of the novel was original, as far as I'm aware, and so that I thought was really to Mr. Wilde's credit. The great. Okay, and The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Mayer. Wait, no, Wilde. Although he did have an affinity for sausage. Okay. Okay. The Picture of Dorian Gray. The Picture of Dorian Gray, isn't it? By Oscar Mayer. The picture. Damn it! I had this sausage line ready. I wanted to make sure I used it effectively, but now that okay. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Mayer. Wait, no, Wilde. But he did love sausage. Okay, I got it. I had to edit that a couple times to make sure I got that joke in there correctly because I wanted to use it. But I forgot it at first, so I had to go back and edit it in. Anyway, let me pull back now the part that I did originally. Before when I forgot to make the joke, and now that I made the joke, now that, so now I can go back to that. Okay, so I just finished talking about the originality. So yeah, I really did kind of the idea of the novel. In terms of the execution, it's okay. He also uses just indefatigable and just like me with conceptual, and just like him with. I remember he used the word languidly a lot, or he sat languidly on the couch, and then he lied languidly on the bed, and then he rode languidly his tricycle and whatever the guy did. But what I will say is that the other thing about it is, obviously Wilde was homosexual. I'm not a homophobe at all. It doesn't bother me. I did find his writing a little homoerotic for my taste, is what I'm gonna say about that. I have absolutely no problem again with people being homosexual. I'm I don't have any bigotry at all. I'm cool with people's proclivities and whatever. But the thing is, it was a little uncomfortable for me to read a sort of homoerotically tinged novel. I remember kind of like, whoa, this is pretty gay. So if that's your thing, then you might really like that part of it. But it just it didn't like. I'm not saying it like repulsed me or that I like threw the book across the room and was like, get away from me, but because I didn't not at all. But but I remember it did. I did notice that he was himself in this novel. I mean, he was known for his being a public queen kind of thing, and it definitely comes through in the novel is all I'm saying. So if you're really uncomfortable with that, I'm not really uncomfortable with that. I was slightly uncomfortable with it, not that he was a queen, but just that reading about sort of homoerotic moments. I mean, they're subtle, but they're definitely very clear in the book. But anyway, so it wasn't a big deal, but I'm just mentioning it because it is one of the striking features. Now, as far as the novel itself, again, I thought the writing similar to what was it, Brave New World. The writing, I liked his idea in both cases much more than the writing itself. I didn't think actually, I mean, in Brave New World's case, I didn't find Huxley to be a particularly skillful writer, but I really liked the idea of it. Wilde is a little more skillful writer, but I also didn't think his writing was great. But I liked it. But what was there was as I was thinking of the comparison, some contrast occurred to me. But so the general plot, it's sort of like a two-part plot that's kind of connected. But anyway, I like the first part of the plot. The second part really wasn't that much of a plot. But this was a really good plot. And I did enjoy it, wanting to, read more to find out how it resolves. So I did think it was well executed in that regard. But I thought it could have been just written better, not just because of the homo stuff, but just it could have been just from a literary sense, more could have been done. And again, no homophobia. That's my thing, by the way. I how, because the phrase no homo or whatever, people take offense to it, even though it's not intended as offense at all. But just to clarify that someone's not intentionally trying to be homoerotic when they said something. So what I say is no homophobia, so that people know I'm using the phrase to make something clear, but I'm also disavowing homophobia. So at the same time, so I feel like that's a good compromise. If I say something sus, then I follow it up with a no homophobia, something like that. I don't know. But anyway, I just don't want people to be offended because I'm not at all homophobic, but just the homoerotic nature of it was a little bit jarring to me. I went on way too long about the homoerotic nature of it in general, I think, but hopefully hopefully it's funny. I don't know. I found it funny. Again, not in a derisive way, just the longer I go on now, the more absurd it gets, which kind of also makes it a little funny. Okay, Roots. This is an easy S tier. This is a phenomenal novel. What I found is that Haley's writing is actually very similar to Orwell's in terms of just it's clear, direct lucidity. It's not too simple, but it's not overly complicated. It just tells the story in a perfectly digestible fashion. It's a satisfying and digestible meal. It hits the spot. It's got enough nutrients and flavor and everything that it hits the spot, but it doesn't leave you overly saturated, and it's right at the spot. And the plot itself is incredible. It's basically an epic saga. I don't know if this cover has it. No, I don't know what this book is. An act of love, and it is that. And is this what you mean? That's such a New York Times corny, pretentious description. But a lot of the copies have just like the caption, like an epic saga of an American family or something, which it really is. I mean, it's like from where it begins, literally geographically, and then like all of the events that unfold. It's like it's fascinating and compelling, and I mean, it's definitely a page turner. Even though like not in the conventional sense of like it's like action and like lots of suspense, but just the characters are really crisp and distinct. And Cam Newton always reminded me of Chicken George, the character. Like if you're familiar with the novel, I haven't seen the movie. I know the movie is famous for Chappelle made one of the scenes from the movie. I don't remember the scene that Chappelle did, satirizing a scene from the movie being in the book, so that might have been like an addition to the film script. But anyway, where was I going with this? Well, yeah, there's a character in the novel named Chicken George, and Cam Newton reminds me of him to a T. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. Just like in terms of the way that character is described, like I just pictured him like immediately as Cam Newton. So it's kind of just a weird aside. But and if you don't know, Cam Newton's like a former football player who now does like broadcast work on ESPN. But yeah, it's like it's a period piece, which always like for me is a plus. The writing is perfect, and the story is really tremendous. And not even like probably some people who like maybe even haven't even read it would say like it's an amazing book, because because slavery, and they want to like show that like they're woke and whatever. Like this is the kind of book that a woke person would like talk up probably without even having read it. But that's not my reason, because I'm not very woke. I'm not like anti, like I'm just like a straightforward guy. Like I'm not like hateful. I'm not a bigot. I'm also not woke. I'm just like I'm just like I think a pretty sensible centrist realist. That's also kind of another unnecessary aside. But anyway, the fact is that like this is truly on its own merit a great novel. Sound and the Fury. Here we go. Yeah, this is B tier for me, guys. The Faulkner stuff. I honestly didn't even finish this. Like, it is really interesting. This is it's a fun novel to explore. Like, because it really does like take a look at kind of like I don't remember if this is technically antebellum, like before the war South, or just like or postbellum, but still like the South was of course very sort of still rural and primitive, like for a long time after the war. I'm trying to think of like kind of what points I want to make here with this novel. First of all, so yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing like it. I didn't put it on here because I also didn't finish it, but As I Lay Dying is another Faulkner novel that I got farther in that one, but nothing really happens for like a long, long time, and it doesn't really suck you in any way. His use of Southern vernacular is very interesting because you just don't see many novels, at least not many well-known titles, that were written with that like that heavily reliant use of Southern idiom. The characters really have thick drawls, and the scenes that take place are very Southern, in terms of just the things the characters are doing and like how they're interacting and stuff. It's like a true Deep South kind of feel, and you can, and definitely it comes through in the novel, and so it's interesting in that regard because you don't really read like I said, characters that often that are even like in Roots, actually, which is also takes place in the Deep South, but because like slave owners obviously were like in the genteel class. Like you don't really, I mean, of course you do, there are some overseers in the novel who are like, like rednecks and stuff like that. It's funny because also Haley even includes like in his, like one of the characters tells another character something that is, people actually resent when you talk about this now, but Haley himself like mentioned it through a character that the poor rednecks like literally like dirt poor, not like he's not sympathizing poor, but like the dirt poor rednecks who were literally eating dirt out in the mountains. I mean, like they had it worse off than like the slaves, because slaves were an investment. They were like had their basic needs like insured, whereas people like the hillbillies way in the mountains were basically fending for themselves. A lot of inter intrafamily relationships, famously, like again eating dirt and hunting squirrels at best. Like they really had it rough off. And one of the characters like, yeah, them white folk, like them politicians care more about us niggas, or well, I shouldn't say that on camera. Care about us. I mean, they do, in the novel, they of course refer to themselves that way because that's, they're new to English. That's how like they're, the first generation, obviously, but they're like their slave owners refer to them as ends. So that's how they knew each other. And still to this day, but, like, oh yeah, them politicians care more about us ends than they do about those like hillbillies or whatever, which is, I mean, actually true. Like slaves probably led a better life than like the poorest white people, which again, it's not like the big difference is that like the slaves didn't have a choice. Like they couldn't advance beyond a certain point. Like they could advance in some ways in terms of like they were allowed to do side projects to make a little money for themselves and stuff like that. Some people might not know that. Like the industrious ones were able to build some amount of life, but there were certain things that they just did not have the freedom to do, which any white person, no matter how poor they were, would have been allowed to do or whatever. So that's obviously the big difference. Economically, they were better off than some people, but in terms of personal freedom, they were, of course, the worst off. So that's just a clarification that sometimes gets sort of the nuance gets overlooked. But anyway, so back to Sound the Fury. It's just like it's the modulation between like thoughts and words and scenes, and it's inventive, and I won't say it's pretentious necessarily because I think it's an interesting idea. He gives it a good go. It's sort of like also Ulysses, the whole sort of series, Portrait of the Artist, all the way up through Ulysses. Like it's, I don't even remember which came first. I also did not finish Ulysses or Portrait of the Artist or any of those ones from James Joyce because they're too complicated for how interesting they are, which is not that interesting. And it's just hard to follow. And I know that, they were celebrated in the time for how like innovative they were and stuff, but for me, it didn't work. I do like the Faulkner novels better just because I think the portrayal of Southern life is very, like evocative and interesting, but ultimately, like they just don't read all that well. He's a good writer. I mean, like it's hard to explain because, like, I do think the writing is good, but it's also like it gets a little bit convoluted, and the plot just isn't interesting enough to justify that. Silas Marner, then, by George Eliot. Who was a chick, just so we're clear. And this I want to put in the B tier, not because she's a chick. Okay, I've got Agatha Christie in the A tier. But yeah, it is a fun read. I mean, I don't know, fun read, but it's an interesting read, a quaint read. She uses a lot of extended epigrams, which are kind of like phrasing, like where she sort of, as the narrator of the novel, like imparts wisdom, like saying like, for it is often a man who does this or that, who finds he, like, she kind of like injects, her own sort of quips and epigrams into the novel, but they can be a little bit verbose and frequent, and so that's not ideal. I think she actually reminds me of, I forgot to put it in here, Vanity Fair, William Makepeace Thackeray, a.k.a. C. Thackeray Chad, a.k.a. Thackinson. But I feel like she was inspired by his writing, because his writing does a bit of that too. And then she went a little bit overboard with it. The plot is interesting, but it does have a flaw in the way it unfolds. But I do recommend it as like an interesting read about a time that none of us will ever experience. It's an interesting setting in I don't know how you describe that period of England, but pre-modern, depending on how you define modern, period of England, and it's interesting, but it's not gripping, and then it kind of there's a flaw in the way it unfolds, in my opinion. But in general, I thought like, so it's the writing style is like social realism, it's called, and I did find it effective in that. Like it definitely feels like a real like atmosphere, a real plot that's like happening. You feel like you're there, and it doesn't stretch credulity, and it's not like over the top or anything. It's I'm like winding down health-wise here. But anyway, so I do recommend giving it a try if you feel like it could be for you. A Tale of Two Cities by Darrell's Chickens. Perhaps Chickens is most classic work, or most well-known work. I don't know. I mean, Great Expectations, maybe. David Copperfield, maybe, but probably A Tale of Two Cities, right? I read this one like night by night in my car, even though I had an apartment at that time. But what happened was, this was when I was living in Los Angeles, Sherman Oaks specifically. And my apartment, like the heat was out or something. Like the heat was busted, which wasn't a problem during the day, but as of course, anyone who's been to Los Angeles will know that the two seasons in Southern California are night and day. So, it gets warm in the day, but at night it gets cold. And so at night, it would be cold in my apartment. But it wasn't like I wasn't ready to get in bed and, get under the covers or whatever. It'd be like, 8:30, 9 at night, whatever it was. Like, basically as soon as the sun goes down is when it gets cold. So I wouldn't even be done eating for the night. So this is absolutely disgusting. But what I would do is I would go to like the Ralph's down the street. This was like became a nightly ritual while I was reading A Tale of Two Cities. And I would get a bag of peanut butter M&Ms, a bag of Snyder's of Hanover's buffalo wing pretzel pieces, and a 32-ounce Bud Ice. And I would bring them back, and I would go out to my car, which was parked in this like there's kind of like a back alley, but it wasn't like this was in Sherman Oaks, kind of like suburban area. It wasn't like a seedy like alley, with like businesses, and it wasn't like in an urban alley. It was like a parking alley basically, and because it was nighttime and it was dark, nobody was coming and going, no one could really see me, so I'd go in my car and turn the heat on, and open up my dinner of which, I mean, it was so tasty. Like, I mean, I love digging into this stuff, but looking back on it now, like, it's no surprise that probably my health issue I have now is like colon cancer or something, and I'm paying for it now. But this was what I enjoyed doing back then, and I still have fond nostalgic memories of it, even though, like, I think it's now killing me. But yeah, so I would sit in my car at night and just read A Tale of Two Cities. And it was Daryl's Chickens is typical kind of, quaint, sometimes, occasionally loquacious. He's has a distinct writing style. Some people love it, some people hate it. I enjoyed it, and I was really engrossed in the novel for a while. And then I think somehow I got interrupted with like something going on in life or whatever, that I got away from it for a while. Then I came back and finished it. I found that when I came back to finish it, I don't know if this had anything to do with like a change in sort of the novel's progression, or if it was like I just had less enthusiasm for it when I came back to it and kind of force finished it. But I really loved the I loved reading his account of, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and his unique characters, the jackal, and I really found the beginning compelling with the mail ride, which it's so fascinating, just like reading any book that's about like a different time and place than what you come from. Like the Dover Mail, which I guess, people would get rides in mail coaches. Like it would take the mail, but then I guess it had room for like people too, is what I gathered. Unless it wasn't actually taking mail, and that was, for some reason, it was just called that. But yeah, like the mail coach ride, where when who was it? Dr. Manette, after he was recalled to life, and Laurie had to go to Tellson's and get some note or whatever. It was a really interesting beginning, and then I think it genuinely did slow down a bit, and then I got away from reading it for a while, and then when I came back, and it was but anyway, let me put it in what time is it? Oh shit. Let me put it, I'll put it in the A tier. I feel like most people reading it now would find it B tier. It's like, I feel like it didn't, I don't know, maybe it didn't age as well as it might have, Things Fall Apart. This is great. This is I'm gonna go A tier, but it's borderline S tier. This is a really, especially to me, a lot of what's in here really resonated with sort of my character traits, even though not precisely. There are some things like I said, I don't want to give away too many details of particular things, but definitely some aspects of the protagonist really resonate with me, and also the challenges of his time, I think, really kind of are resonate, reflect on our time too. Like they're timeless, and it's very interesting. It's honestly sort of like modern day in reverse. It's hard to explain. You have to read it or be familiar with it to get that, but to really understand. But I didn't mean to sound like pretentious, like in order to get that or whatever. But you do have to kind of know the book to understand like how it's basically like a mirror plot of today's world, but in a different world, and it's really, it's suspenseful, it's dramatic, and it's well written, and but it's a little short, and it does borrow some elements from actually a biblical work, so I won't put it quite in the S tier, But I mean, it's really a good read, really enjoyable. And again, this is also, it takes place in tribal Africa, which, again, things that are like from different, which is most of these really, novels that are set in like a time and place unfamiliar. I always find really just fascinating because I like to learn about, how things are in other cultures and places and stuff like that. So that's A tier. And then what do we have here? A little surprise. Ladies and gentlemen. Dun, 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 dun. It's my rise to the top in Hollywood. Hashtag of the middle part of the bottom third. This is actually me actually taking this picture, which in the hills of Santa Clarita, which I would go to and hike occasionally, even though they're not like hiking trails. Like it's hard to explain. They're like right next to some neighborhoods, but there's some weird noises coming from outside, so I gotta like be mindful of why that's going on. Yeah, but this is my novel. This is my experience living in Hollywood. I reference some of the things, although the things I reference here actually aren't in the novel, but there are some delicious anecdotes. And I was inspired I didn't mention the novel, but my stylistic choices were sort of a blend of Ben Franklin's autobiography and Candide, and I think that's it. But and I want to do a much bigger kind of like more enthusiastic promotion of this, but I'm just not really feeling up to it. But I'll do it like maybe in a separate video, and I want to put it in like the Super S Plus tier. This is available on Amazon, you guys. This is like, I mean, I don't mean to brag. I'm a pretty like humble, modest guy, but this is definitely better than all of these combined. So I would say, and it's only $10 on Amazon. That is a steal. So that's going to be the cherry on top of our thing. Yeah, Super S Plus, and that'll do it for this extremely long video that will probably get like 7 views. But if you're one of those 7, thank you very much, and have a nice day.